Did you know, in 2003, upon arriving at Manchester United, Cristiano Ronaldo famously said, "If you think I'm good, then you should see Fabio Paim." While most fans were left wondering who the hell he was talking about, every club in Europe had already been scouting him for ages. So much was the belief that he would become the next great, that at 14, Sporting was paying him more than they paid most of their first-team players, driving around in supercars before he even had a driving license. However, by 2007, as Ronaldo was about to enter his prime, Paim was yet to make his debut. If it was argued that he was just being given time to get mentally ready for the top level, quickly, people started realizing he was just completely out of it. And after 2 seasons, as everyone was ready to give up on him, Chelsea seemingly showed up out of nowhere with a second chance. But not only would he waste it, he would go on an absolute rampage that would culminate in him going completely broke, becoming a criminal, and serving time in jail. Fabio Paim is easily football's most incredible cautionary tale, and this is his story, like it has never been told before. It all started when a social worker spotted him playing in a rough neighborhood west of Lisbon at 6 years of age. They were just building a football team, thinking sports were a good way to make sure the kids stayed on the right path. But then they saw Fabio Paim. The social worker I mentioned once said, "From the moment I saw him, I already knew one day I'd be on TV telling this story, the story of how I stumbled upon the greatest player of all time. Unfortunately, that isn't the case." Immediately, they began pestering the young boy to make sure he joined the squad. But even after he said yes, there was a problem. The tournament he would be playing in was for kids over 7 years old. Regardless, they were so desperate to see him in action that they just gave him another kid's ID card and told him to pretend he was someone else. As dumb as it sounds, it actually worked, and everyone who saw him lost their minds over how good he was, which only became more impressive when their whole charade fell apart and everyone realized he was even younger than they thought. They say in training he was something from another world. His coach once said to reporters, "The shortest training session I ever gave came because of him. He kept destroying everyone. He dribbled one kid, then another, and found himself in midfield with the keeper slightly off center. He swung his foot over the ball, rotate 45 degrees, and with the heel of his foot, smashed it into the top corner. I stood there, grabbed the whistle and told the kids, 'It's over. After something like that, there's no point in continuing practice.'" The following season, in yet another youth tournament, the team luckily found themselves to be facing none other than Sporting CP, Portugal's most prestigious academy, which brought us talents like Futre, Figo, Quaresma, Nani, and of course, Cristiano Ronaldo. That day, the match ended 3-1 in favor of Sporting, but the biggest winner was Fabio Paim. Besides scoring his team's only goal, he had repeatedly embarrassed the Sporting squad, so often that it left them with no other choice but to sign him, reaching an agreement for him to join at the end of the season. Other clubs came, but the staff at his team refused every offer, no matter the amount, believing an academy like Sporting was the only place for a kid like Paim. They wanted the best for him, to succeed above all else. It was the lack of this sort of guidance that would be his demise later on. In 1997, he finally arrived at Sporting, but he wasn't the only talent who had just seemingly fallen right onto their doorstep. There was another kid, a bit more shy, around 2.5 years older, who had just arrived from Madeira. His name was Cristiano, and from the get-go the comparations began. And just as quickly a conclusion was reached. Fabio was not just better, he was much better. Right on his first year, he completely took over his squad, and by the age of 13, he wasn't just their main man. He was bigger than the whole thing put together. He became so famous for his talent that thousands of fans would show up to every training session just to watch him. But it wasn't just the local fans. Every club with a few million laying around was scouting him. It is even said that the French national team promised him a house, a car, jobs for every one of his family members, and an obscene wage so that he would move to their country and vow to file for citizenship in order to play for them instead of Portugal. You don't hear something like that every day. Besides this, as you might imagine, agents began surrounding him like vultures, and in the end, Jorge Mendes was the one to snatch him. It was around the time he turned 15 that things began escalating. At that point, Ronaldo moved to United, and as the world starred, completely in awe of a young CR7, he was asked by a reporter how he was able to adapt to the Premier League so easily. And he replied, "If you think I'm good, then you should see Fabio Paim." If Sporting were already under pressure from big clubs, now, with Jorge Mendes becoming his agent and Ronaldo pulling off the greatest unintentional marketing stunt of the decade, Sporting were forced to bulletproof their Wonderkid's contract. And so, at 15 years of age, he began earning more than most first-team players. If Paim had always shown to be reckless, getting bad grades, staying up late, and going missing from time to time, once all the money arrived, it was hard for the young boy not to become a loose cannon. If some people who climb to fame usually mess up by forgetting where they came from, Paim suffered from the exact opposite. He remained too dependent on his childhood friends' approval. So with his first lump of cash, he bought a massive house with a pool right by his old street. They say that's exactly when it all went to hell. Friends were over 24/7, and Paim seemed stuck in a loop, constantly trying to impress them by keeping the party going non-stop and blowing his money on frivolous things. First a convertible Mercedes, then a Porsche, even Ferrari and a Lamborghini. His 10-car garage was full before he was even old enough to get a license. But don't think that stopped him. In an interview, he admitted he was already frequently driving them, saying they were automatics, you just gotta step on the gas and steer away. Regardless, at that point, he still performed on the pitch. I mean, what? He finished the season with an impressive 28 goals in 29 games, and was the first one to admit that regardless of his talent, he had to work harder and harder every day if he was to achieve his goals. But then, to add fuel to the fire, he got injured. Really bad, to the point where he needed knee surgery. With nothing to do, he struggled to keep focused. And by the time he came back, the numbers began dwindling, and the worries began taking center stage. By 2007, Paim had turned 19 years old. And if Ronaldo was preparing himself for the season that would bring him his first Ballon d'Or, Paim was yet to make the first team at Sporting, though he had now represented Portugal at the youth level, even being handed the iconic number 7 shirt. Still, as much as they suspected, he wasn't at all ready to take the step into professional football. With his age about to creep up into the 20s, Sporting felt forced to get him some minutes, and so he was sent on loan to Oliva Ace e Moscovite in the Portuguese second tier. It was supposed to be a good middle term. He would get some playing time at a higher level without being exposed to the pressures of first-tier football. However, by the end of the season, he had accumulated 11 matches with 9 defeats, 2 draws, not a single win, and as many red cards as he had goals. As you might imagine, they were relegated, and Paim's motivation was at an all-time low. His next club was Trofense, on loan yet again, and no matter how well they were doing in the second tier, Paim began getting impatient and insisting he should be playing at the highest level. So he moved yet again, on loan as per usual, to Paços Ferreira in the Portuguese First Division. Suddenly, playing time became scarce once again, and after finding some players who were just as reckless as him, his biggest memory from the club was going on a trip to Mexico without even packing any bags, just him and a credit card. By the time he came back, he had 3 suitcases full of new clothes. This was the last straw for many people. He even got his last ever call-up for the youth ranks of the Portuguese national team. It seemed it was officially over. But then he got a second opportunity he couldn't have even dreamed of. Luis Felipe Scolari had just left the command of the Portuguese national team in order to take over at Chelsea following Mourinho's dramatic exit. And alongside him, he brought a bunch of Portuguese players, from Deco to Bozingua, Ricardo Quaresma, and finally, as Abramovich caved to his every whim, Fabio Paim, on loan with an option to buy at the end of the season. It was incredible to see. From being denied a place at Paços de Ferreira to playing for a European giant like Chelsea in a matter of months. That's the kind of magic a man like Jorge Mendes can pull off. Clearly, he had always been a lucky guy, but this was off the charts. However, he very much did not make the most of it. There are a bunch of stories from his time there. Once he asked Drogba to pick High M up from his house on the way to training. only to end up forgetting there was even a session to attend, leaving him outside waiting and furiously honking. 3 months after arriving at the club, he had only played for the reserves, and so he just asked to be sent back to Portugal, claiming he was sure he was never going to be given an opportunity. I feel like I have to say this again. It had been 3 months. Clearly, patience wasn't his strong suit. From here on out, he trained with Rio Ave for a while, but they also gave up on him, so he stayed without a team for the rest of the season. The following year, now 23 years old, Sporting sent him on loan yet again to Real Massima in the 3rd division. And well, that was it. With only 2 games played all season, Sporting had had enough, and Payne was released from his contract. At this point, nobody wanted him. He ended up having to track one of his old academy coaches and nearly beg him to give him a spot at Torrense in the Portuguese 3rd division, claiming he was now completely broke. The coach caved in and even gave his word to the owner of the club that Payne would behave, but then he shamelessly left after only a few months, breaking the terms of his contract and the trust his ex-coach had put on him. His motive was simple. He had been offered a millionaire contract in Angola, where he hoped he would be able to get called up to the national team, given that his parents were originally from there. But trust me, from then on out, his problems off the pitch became more worrying than his underperformances. After he completely flopped in Angola, he came back to the Portuguese 3rd division, only to end up leaving for Qatar and then coming back once again. There was even a petition for Sporting to give him a chance, but it went nowhere. He made a bunch of appearances on TV shows and then moved to China and then Malta and Lithuania and then Luxembourg. You get the deal, but calm down a second because it gets worse. Let's go back to 2012, when he first arrived back from Angola. That year, out of nowhere, he got accused of sexually assaulting a woman in Lisbon. And what surprised me the most was that the police were very quick to act upon it. Turns out he was already on their records for several accounts of public indecency, with several incidents where he was caught masturbating in the street while he watched people. I couldn't find much more regarding what happened in this incident, but as dark as it may sound, Payne made my job easier. Because when he was playing in Lithuania, it happened again. Once more accused of sexually assaulting a woman, with the Lithuanian police providing a statement in which they claimed he could get up to 7 years in prison. Somehow, Payne came to the press insisting he had not even been accused of anything, and it all just evaporated with no actual prosecution, though he very suspiciously exited the country right after it all came to light, despite how well things were going at the club. Later on, after leaving Luxembourg, he once again showed up on the news, as a sexually explicit video of him and a young woman leaked online. Then he came back to Portugal to yet another 3rd division team, joining another reality show where, despite being aware that he was being recorded 24/7, he managed to expose his genitalia to the whole country. Not surprising, considering the whole public indecency thing. Eventually, he moved to Brazil's 4th division, now 29 years old. And after some problems with his immigration papers, he came back to, you guessed it, Portugal's 3rd division. It all went south once again, and just like many other failed wonder kids, he started a program trying to coach young kids. But eventually, he still managed to get in trouble, entering another reality show, this time in Angola, where he had to be expelled after being violent towards a woman. And finally, in 2019, the world's most putrid cherry on top, he got arrested for drug trafficking, being caught in the act of dealing cocaine, with the drugs stuck in his underpants, carrying a knife, a pair of scissors, and a precision scale. Couldn't be much more obvious. Later, it was even suggested that he was being used as a drug mule, smuggling drugs to the Portuguese archipelagos, though in the end, despite audio evidence and all, he managed to get some fancy lawyer to win his trial for him. And he was released after 9 months, still managing to be arrested on 2 occasions during trial for driving under the influence of alcohol, and even being considered a flight risk at one point, being banned from leaving the country. And to finish it all off, surprise, surprise, he's actually still playing. He just made a comeback and joined the Polish 4th division. Though, of course, he already moved on and is now playing in Moldova, having recently claimed he wishes he had been born with less talent. Not to be too harsh, but perhaps being born with better decision-making might be the way to go if a Jenny ever crosses paths with him. Like the video and subscribe for more?